Commander Jake Morrison had seen hell before, but nothing like this. The radio crackled with desperate voices as his SEAL team hugged the rocky ground of the Afghan mountainside. Enemy fire rained down from 3 different positions, trapping his 12-man unit in a valley that had become their potential grave. Control. This is Bravo 6. We need immediate air support. Heavy casualties expected without intervention. Morrison spoke into his radio, trying to keep his voice steady despite the chaos around him. The mission had started simple enough. Intelligence reports indicated a high-value target hiding in a compound nestled between 2 mountain ridges. The plan was textbook: fast insertion, capture the target, extract before dawn. But someone had leaked their position. The moment Morrison's team rappelled from their helicopter, machine gun fire erupted from hidden positions carved into the mountainside. 2 of his men were already down. Corpsman Rodriguez was doing his best to keep them alive, but they needed a medical evacuation soon. The problem was that 3 separate enemy positions had them pinned down with overlapping fields of fire. Any helicopter trying to land would be shot down before it could touch the ground. Morrison studied the terrain through his binoculars. The enemy had chosen their positions perfectly. One group controlled the high ground to the north, another blocked the eastern escape route, and a third prevented any movement to the west. Behind them, a sheer cliff made retreat impossible. It was a classic kill box, and they had walked right into it. "Sir, we've got movement on the northern ridge," whispered Sergeant Collins, pointing toward shadows shifting between the rocks. "Looks like they're bringing up more heavy weapons." The commander's mind raced through every tactical scenario he had learned in 20 years of special operations. Close air support was their only option, but the enemy positions were too close to his team. Any bombing run would risk killing his own men. Attack helicopters couldn't get close enough without being destroyed by the shoulder-fired missiles his spotters had identified. His radio buzzed with an incoming transmission from headquarters. "Bravo 6, this is Control. We have multiple aircraft available for support. What do you need?" Morrison looked around at his trapped team. Young faces stared back at him, some scared, others determined, all waiting for him to find a way out of this nightmare. These men trusted him with their lives, and he was running out of options. "Control, we need precision strikes on 3 fortified positions. Grid coordinates follow." Morrison read off the enemy locations, knowing even as he spoke that conventional airstrikes would be too dangerous. The enemy fighters were dug into positions less than 200 meters from his team's location. "Copy that, Bravo 6. We're scrambling F-16s for close air support." Morrison shook his head. Fighter jets were too fast, too high, and carried weapons too powerful for this situation. They needed something that could fly low and slow, something that could distinguish between friend and foe in the narrow confines of this valley. But what aircraft could survive the missile threats while providing the surgical precision they desperately needed? The sound of incoming artillery whistled overhead. The enemy was bringing up mortars, trying to finish what they had started. Morrison knew his team had maybe 30 minutes before those mortars found their range. After that, there would be nothing left to rescue. Corpsman Rodriguez crawled over to Morrison's position, his hands stained with blood. "Sir, Jenkins needs surgery within the hour, or we're going to lose him. Thompson's stable for now, but he's lost a lot of blood." Morrison nodded grimly. The tactical situation was becoming a medical emergency. Even if they could break out of the kill box, his wounded men couldn't survive a fighting retreat through mountainous terrain. They needed air support, and they needed it now. He switched his radio to the emergency frequency. "Any station? Any station. This is Bravo 6. We have wounded personnel and require immediate close air support. Enemy positions danger close. How copy?" Static filled his earpiece for several long seconds. Then a voice came through, different from the others, calm, professional, with just a hint of southern accent. "Bravo 6, this is Hog 17. I copy your emergency traffic. Morrison had heard that call sign before. HOG was the radio designation for A-10 Thunderbolt aircraft, the tank-busting jets that infantry called warthogs. But something was different about this particular pilot's voice. HOG 17, be advised we have multiple enemy positions with heavy weapons. Shoulder-fired missiles confirmed in the area. Roger that, Bravo 6. I'm 20 minutes out from your position. Can you mark targets with smoke? Morrison frowned. A-10s were tough aircraft, designed to survive ground fire, but they were still vulnerable to modern anti-aircraft missiles. And something about the pilot's voice bothered him. It was too calm, too confident for someone flying into what amounted to a death trap. HOG 17, are you aware of the threat level? We've identified at least 2 SA-7 missile systems. A slight chuckle came through the radio. Bravo 6, I've danced with worse. Just keep your heads down and trust me to do my job. Morrison looked at his watch. 20 minutes felt like an eternity, but it was their only hope. He began organizing his team's defensive positions, preparing for what might be their last stand. The enemy fire was intensifying, and the mortar rounds were getting closer with each salvo. As bullets ricocheted off the rocks around him, Morrison wondered what kind of pilot would volunteer to fly into this nightmare. Whoever HOG 17 was, they were either incredibly brave or completely crazy. In 20 minutes, he would find out which one. Captain Sarah Viper Chen had been flying combat missions for 8 years, but she had never encountered a situation quite like this one. As her A-10 Thunderbolt roared through the Afghan sky at 500 feet, she studied the tactical display on her screen. 12 American soldiers trapped in a valley, surrounded by enemies who had every advantage except one. They hadn't met her yet. The other pilots back at base had called this mission suicide. 3 separate anti-aircraft positions, shoulder-fired missiles, and friendlies so close to enemy positions that one wrong move could kill the very people she was trying to save. Her commanding officer had actually tried to stop her from taking the mission. "Chen, this is too dangerous. We'll wait for the situation to develop," Colonel Martinez had said. But Sarah had heard the desperation in Commander Morrison's voice. She had listened to the radio chatter about wounded soldiers who might not survive another hour. While others debated tactics and risks, good men were dying in that valley. That was all she needed to know. Now, as the mountains grew larger in her windscreen, Sarah ran through her attack plan one more time. The A-10 wasn't the fastest or prettiest aircraft in the Air Force, but it was perfect for this mission. Its titanium armor could withstand small arms fire, its twin engines could keep flying even with battle damage, and its 30mm cannon could deliver precision fire that larger bombs simply couldn't match. Her radio crackled with Morrison's voice. HOG 17, marking northern target with red smoke now. Sarah spotted the thin red trail rising from the mountainside. Even from this distance, she could see muzzle flashes from multiple enemy positions. The SEAL team was completely surrounded, and the enemy fighters were moving to better firing positions. Time was running out. Bravo 6, I have visual on your smoke. Beginning attack run on northern position. Sarah banked her aircraft into a steep dive, lining up her approach. The heads-up display in front of her showed the target area, but she relied more on her eyes and instincts. Technology was useful, but nothing replaced a pilot's ability to read a battlefield and make split-second decisions. The enemy position came into focus through her targeting system. She could see fighters moving between rock formations, their weapons trained on Morrison's team below. These weren't random insurgents. They moved with military precision and had obviously planned this ambush carefully. At 800 feet, Sarah opened fire with her cannon. The GAU-8 Avenger was a fearsome weapon, essentially a flying tank gun that could fire 3,900 rounds per minute. But Sarah didn't hold the trigger down for long bursts. Instead, she fired in short, controlled sequences, each one precisely aimed at specific targets. The effect was immediate and devastating. Explosions erupted along the northern ridge as her 30mm rounds tore through enemy positions. Fighters who had been confidently firing down at the trapped SEALs suddenly found themselves under attack from above. But Sarah's celebration was short-lived. As she pulled out of her dive, 2 shoulder-fired missiles streaked up from hidden positions. She had expected this and was already executing evasive maneuvers, dropping flares and chaff to confuse the missile's guidance systems. The first missile detonated harmlessly behind her aircraft, fooled by the flares. The second one came closer, close enough that she felt the aircraft shudder from the explosion. Warning lights flashed on her instrument panel, but all major systems remained operational. Bravo 6, northern position is neutralized, moving to eastern target. Morrison's voice came back immediately. Outstanding work, Hog 17. Be advised, eastern position has heavy machine guns and possible RPGs. Sarah was already turning toward the eastern ridge, her eyes scanning for threats. She had noticed something during her first attack run that troubled her. The enemy fighters weren't just defending their positions. They were systematically trying to collapse the valley walls to bury Morrison's team alive. She could see where explosives had been placed along the cliff faces. The eastern position was more challenging. The enemy fighters had learned from watching her destroy their northern comrades and were keeping their heavy weapons hidden until the last moment. Sarah would have to fly lower and slower to draw them out, making herself an even more tempting target for their missiles. She dropped down to 300 feet, flying straight toward the eastern ridge. To anyone watching, it looked like she was making a standard strafing run. But Sarah had a different plan. At the last second, she would pull up sharply and attack from an unexpected angle. Machine gun fire erupted from the ridge, green tracers reaching up toward her aircraft. Sarah ignored them, maintaining her course until the last possible moment. Then she pulled back hard on the stick, sending her A-10 into a near-vertical climb. The enemy fighters, expecting her to fly straight over their position, were caught completely off guard. Sarah rolled inverted at the top of her climb and dove back down, attacking from directly above their fortified positions. Her cannon fire was even more precise this time. She could see individual enemy fighters scrambling for cover as her rounds chewed through their defensive positions. One heavy machine gun position disappeared in a cloud of dust and debris. A mortar team that had been preparing to fire was eliminated before they could launch their next round. But the eastern position fought back harder than the first. More missiles launched toward her aircraft, and this time the enemy gunners led their targets better. Sarah felt impacts along her right wing as armor-piercing rounds found their mark. "Engine fire warning, right engine," she announced calmly to herself, running through emergency procedures even as she continued her attack. The A-10 was designed to fly with one engine, and she had trained for this scenario countless times. She shut down the damaged engine and continued flying on the left engine alone. The aircraft handled differently now, but it was still flyable. More importantly, she still had plenty of ammunition for the most dangerous target, the western position. "Bravo 6, eastern position is neutralized. I'm moving to the final target, but be advised I've taken some damage. This next pass needs to count." Morrison's response carried a note of concern. "Copy that, Hog 17. Final target has been reinforced. They've moved additional fighters from the compound." Sarah could see what Morrison meant. The western position had doubled in size since her first pass over the valley. Enemy fighters had abandoned the compound and moved to defend this last stronghold. They knew that once this position fell, the trapped SEALs would have an escape route. This would be her most dangerous attack yet. Flying on one engine, with battle damage affecting her maneuverability, she would have to get close enough to ensure accurate fire while avoiding a dozen different weapon systems, all aimed at bringing her down. But as Sarah lined up for her final attack run, she wasn't thinking about the risks. She was thinking about 12 American soldiers who were counting on her to get them home. That was all the motivation she needed. Commander Morrison watched in amazement as the lone A-10 aircraft lined up for what everyone knew would be the decisive attack. The pilot of Hog 17 had already accomplished the impossible, destroying two heavily fortified positions while taking significant battle damage. But this final position was different. The enemy had concentrated their remaining forces here, turning it into a fortress bristling with weapons. "All units, prepare to move on my signal," Morrison ordered his team. "When Hog 17 makes her final run, we advance to the rally point." Sergeant Collins looked at him with surprise. "Her, sir?" Morrison nodded grimly. During the last radio exchange, he had finally realized what made this pilot different. Captain Chen was not just incredibly skilled, she was flying into the most dangerous combat zone he had ever seen, and she was doing it with a calmness that spoke of absolute confidence in her abilities. The western ridge erupted with defensive fire as Sarah began her approach. Every weapon the enemy possessed opened up simultaneously: heavy machine guns, assault rifles, RPGs, and at least 3 shoulder-fired missiles. The sky filled with tracers and explosions as they tried to bring down the aircraft that had destroyed their trap. Sarah flew through it all like she was on a training mission. Her damaged A-10 weaved between missile explosions and ignored the small arms fire that sparked off its armored hull. She had one chance to end this fight, and she was not going to waste it. But instead of making a typical strafing run, Sarah did something that made Morrison's jaw drop. She flew straight at the mountainside, as if she planned to crash directly into the enemy position. The defensive fire intensified as enemy fighters realized she wasn't pulling out of her dive. At the last possible second, Sarah pulled her aircraft into a tight spiral around the mountain peak, using the terrain itself as cover while she attacked from multiple angles. Her cannon fire came from directions the enemy had never expected, raking their positions with devastating accuracy. The maneuver was incredibly dangerous, especially for an aircraft flying on one engine. One wrong move, one moment of lost concentration, and she would slam into the mountainside at 300 miles per hour. But Sarah flew with surgical precision, her aircraft dancing around the rocky peaks like it was designed for aerobatics rather than ground attack. Morrison watched as enemy positions were systematically destroyed. Machine gun nests that had seemed impregnable were reduced to rubble. Fighters who had been confident in their fortress were suddenly running for their lives as 30-millimeter rounds chewed through their cover. But the enemy wasn't finished. As Sarah completed her spiral attack, a hidden missile team fired their last shoulder-launched weapon. This missile was different from the others, newer and more sophisticated. It ignored her flares and electronic countermeasures, homing in on the heat signature of her remaining engine. The missile struck Sarah's A-10 just behind the left wing, and Morrison's heart stopped as he watched the aircraft shudder and begin trailing black smoke. For a moment, it seemed like the brave pilot who had saved his team was about to pay the ultimate price. "Hog 17, what's your status?" Morrison called urgently. Sarah's voice came back steady despite the crisis. "Bravo 6, I've lost my remaining engine, but I still have ammunition. Making emergency landing approach. Continue with your extraction." Morrison couldn't believe what he was hearing. Even with both engines destroyed, Captain Chen was still thinking about the mission. Her aircraft was essentially gliding now, but she was using her remaining altitude to continue providing cover for his team. "Negative, Hog 17, we're not leaving without you." "Commander, that's not your call to make. Get your men to the rally point." "That's an order." Morrison had never received orders from an Air Force captain before, but something in Sarah's voice made it clear she was not going to accept any argument. She had risked everything to save his team, and she wasn't going to let her sacrifice be wasted on a misguided rescue attempt. The SEAL team moved quickly toward their extraction point, no longer pinned down by enemy fire. Sarah's attack had been so thorough that the few surviving enemy fighters were in full retreat. But Morrison kept watching the sky, tracking the descent of the damaged A-10. Sarah was performing what pilots called a dead-stick landing, trying to find a flat piece of ground where she could bring down her powerless aircraft. The problem was that this part of Afghanistan consisted mainly of rocky mountainsides and narrow valleys. There were very few places where even an experienced pilot could safely land a damaged aircraft. Morrison spotted a relatively flat area about 2 miles from his position, a dried riverbed that might be long enough for an emergency landing. "Hog 17, I have eyes on a possible landing site, vector 270 degrees from your current position." "I see it, Bravo 6. Thanks for the spotting." Sarah aimed her gliding aircraft toward the riverbed, but Morrison could see she was coming in too fast and too steep. The A-10 was designed to be tough, but no aircraft could survive the kind of impact she was heading toward. Then Sarah did something that proved she truly was an exceptional pilot. She used the mountain terrain to her advantage one final time, flying between 2 peaks to create additional drag and slow her descent. It was a maneuver that required split-second timing and perfect spatial awareness, but she pulled it off flawlessly. The A-10 touched down hard in the dried riverbed, bouncing twice before sliding to a stop in a cloud of dust and debris. For several terrifying seconds, Morrison wasn't sure if the pilot had survived the crash landing. Then he saw movement in the cockpit. Captain Sarah Chen climbed out of her battered aircraft, apparently uninjured, but stranded deep in enemy territory. Morrison immediately changed his team's route toward her location. "Bravo 6, I told you to extract with your team," Sarah's voice came over the radio. "And I told you we don't leave people behind," Morrison replied. "Besides, we owe you a ride home." As Morrison's team reached Sarah's position, he got his first look at the pilot who had saved their lives. Captain Chen was younger than he had expected, probably in her early 30s, with short black hair and intense dark eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. What impressed him most was her complete composure. She had just survived a combat mission that would have broken most pilots, but she looked like she was ready to do it all again. "Outstanding flying, Captain," Morrison said, as his team secured the area around the crashed aircraft. Sarah shrugged as if what she had just accomplished was routine. "Just doing my job, Commander. Though I have to admit, that was more exciting than my usual training flights." Morrison shook his head in amazement. This pilot had just flown through the most intense anti-aircraft fire he had ever seen, destroyed an entire enemy position while flying a damaged aircraft, and crash-landed in hostile territory. And she was calling it more exciting than usual. The extraction helicopter arrived 30 minutes later, guided to their position by Sarah's emergency beacon. As they lifted off from the mountain valley, Morrison looked back at the 3 destroyed enemy positions. Each one had seemed impossible to assault from the ground, but Captain Chen had eliminated them all in less than an hour of flying. During the flight back to base, Morrison asked Sarah how she had developed the skills to fly the way she had in that valley. Her answer was simple. "The A-10 isn't just an aircraft, Commander. In the right hands, it's a precision instrument. Today, your team needed precision, and that's what I gave them." As they landed at the forward operating base, Morrison realized that he had witnessed something extraordinary. Not just exceptional flying, but the kind of courage and skill that defined the very best of the American military. Captain Sarah Chen had transformed what should have been a massacre into a rescue, using nothing but her aircraft, her weapons, and her unwavering determination to bring everyone home. The mission that had started as Commander Morrison's worst nightmare had ended as a testament to what could be accomplished when skill, courage, and determination came together in the hands of a pilot who refused to accept that any situation was impossible. In a single hour of combat flying, Captain Chen had not only saved 12 lives, but had redefined what Morrison thought was possible in the art of close air support.